Alright, so this is going to be the second video for the week of April 13th. So this video is not going to be very long, 30-ish, 35 to 40 minutes, but it's going to cover the information for Chapter 15. So you do have an activity this week that's due by 5 p.m. on Friday. That activity is going to be one that we discussed in the Chapter 14 notes, though. So with Chapter 15, just watch the video and let me know if you have any questions. Remember that you do get 2 drop grades for activities. So if you're happy with the grades that you have on activities 1 through 10, you don't have to complete 11 and 12. But if you need extra activity points, then this is a chance for you to earn those. Also remember that we have Exam 4 coming up. It's going to be released on April 20th. So I'm going to get this video, the last video, posted soon, so that you can watch that and prepare, and I'll also get the review video for Exam 4 posted. But remember, I had these recorded ahead of time. So because of that, probably at least in the review video, if not at some other point, I'll say something about make sure you take Exam 4 with a proctor. That's no longer valid because of the coronavirus situation. We're going to be verifying our identity through the authentication video assignment. So if you hear me say proctored exam, just ignore the proctored bit, okay? It won't be password protected or anything like that. But you do need to make sure you're completing the authentication video. It seems like some students have had issues doing it. The instructions that I posted for you guys, I got from a PDF that I found on the W's website. But some students have had issues with that. It seems like students who have marked their video as unlisted and then sent me or submitted the link in the assignment, that seems to work a little more smoothly. But let me know if you're having any issues, any questions with that. And then after you take Exam 4, I will post your grade in the class at that point. And if you're happy with that grade, you can keep it. Many of you will probably be done with the class at that point, but the final exam will be there to potentially boost your grade. So I'm going to drop your lowest exam grade. So if you want to drop the final exam and keep the grade you had before, then that's fine. If you want to take all 5 exams, then I'll just drop your lowest exam. That's fine as well. So let me know if you have any questions about the material, about grades, or anything else. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and get into lecture. So in this lecture, we're going to be talking about social aspects of later life. We're going to talk a lot about retirement, but talking about social issues in general. So first of all, throughout this class, we've been talking about different priorities that we have in different stages. And so maybe we feel like there's a conflict in each stage that we need to try to solve. So towards the end of life, one of the most important things is to feel like you can look back on your life and feel like you were successful in the way that you spent your time, the way that you spent your money, the way that things turned out. So successful aging is basically making sure that at the end of your life you're happy with the way that everything worked out. So things that you can do, trying to take care of your health, trying to take care of your relationships throughout the lifespan, will make it easier for you to be happy towards the end of life. So although you're probably not thinking about the end of your life right now, certainly we're hoping that that's very far away from you, still we would think that there would be things you could do today that would help you have the best experience as you get older. So when it talks about continuity theory here, as people get older, things change for them a little bit. So we talked during the last lecture video about things like cognitive decline, so memory issues, issues that make things just a little bit more difficult for them. And so they might need a little bit more continuity in their life than you need when you're younger. So when it talks about continuity, basically we're talking about a life that is predictable. So a life that makes sense to us, something that's relatively continuous from day to day. So of course if you have too much continuity, you get bored, you're stuck in a rut, nothing's ever different, you need a little spice, right? But then if you don't have enough continuity, then life can feel out of control, can be very stressful for you. So you may have some personality differences that make you either like to have a lot of structure, or maybe you prefer a little bit less structure. But as people get older, usually they need a little bit more continuity in their life in order to feel successful. So if they have a daily routine, that makes it easier for them to make sure they've done things like take their medication, do all the things that they need to do. So having these strategies can be really helpful for them as they age. So as I was saying, if you're thinking about a conflict in each life stage, then a conflict towards the end of life might be integrity versus despair. So referring to Erikson's theory here, this is the idea
that at the end of life, you will be at a point where you don't have a chance to make changes. So maybe during that midlife crisis kind of situation, you realized something wasn't going the way you wanted. Maybe you panicked a little bit, but you still had some time and some energy and some resources to make some changes. At this point, it feels like you don't have the time, energy, resources left to make changes, and therefore you're going to have to look back on what has happened and accept that. And that can either cause you to be really happy about the way that it went. Maybe you feel like you were productive. Maybe you felt like the things that were most important to you were the things that you spent most of your time and energy on. But then also this could result in despair. So someone might feel like their life just didn't turn out the way they wanted. It has very little meaning to it. Now, there are a couple of different ways to try to handle this. You know, you might reach out to family members and friends and that kind of thing, but you might also consider therapy. This would be a great time to have someone you can talk to if you're struggling with these feelings, you know, later in life, feeling this despair. It talks about externalizing your problems. Perhaps at the end of life, if we're not happy with the way things turned out, this might be a time where, to make ourselves feel better, then we shift the blame to someone else. And I think to a certain extent we all do this every day just a little bit to make it easier to get through our life. We don't always blame ourselves for everything that goes wrong, and that's probably good for our self-esteem. But of course you can take this too far and potentially harm relationships if you're shifting blame where it does not belong. Alright. So, we talked last time about depression and about how depression is different in different age ranges. I asked you guys, those of you who completed the activity, to think about that. So, one thing that we saw is that symptoms of depression actually decrease with age, on average, which doesn't tell us anything about any one particular person, but on average. So then this slide should make sense based on that information. We see that your well-being increases with age. So feeling positive about the life that you're living or about yourself tends to increase with age. Maybe that's because life is less stressful. Maybe that's because we feel like we've already been through a lot of hard things. We're proud of getting through the things that we have survived, that kind of thing. So as you get older, on average, you're more likely to have higher well-being. But then, of course, this does vary depending on your situation. So one thing it mentions here is hardiness. This is basically asking the question, like, are you resilient physically and psychologically, able to bounce back from difficult situations, that kind of thing. Some of this you may feel like you have some control over, like maybe there are things you can do to help improve your marriage or things you can do to help improve your other relationships. But some of these things may feel like they're out of your control, like chronic illness, that kind of thing. One thing that's interesting, I think, is that older women report experiencing less well-being. Now, this is subjective, so this is from your perspective. There's no way to do this research other than to just ask the person, are you happy with the way your life turned out? I think when it talks about older women being less happy than older men, I think there are lots of different potential reasons why this might be. On average, women are more likely to be diagnosed with emotional issues, anxiety, and depression, so that could potentially be part of it. But it may also be that women, being a little bit more relational, might be a little bit more concerned about whether or not other people are happy, maybe focusing on other relationships than men might be. But then once again, this could just be personality issues here. One thing that can be really helpful is to have an understanding of your view of faith and spirituality. Now, I do understand that not everyone has religious beliefs, and so there are lots of different viewpoints on this. But one thing we see is that as people get older, this is often a way that people cope with the stresses, health conditions, or whatever that can come up later in life. So if you look at the times when people start getting back into organized religion, usually when they have kids, or when there's some kind of health crisis, or when they're approaching kind of later life, kind of end of life time periods, maybe times when people think about religious issues a little bit more. So you can think about the fact that if you are part of a religious organization, then you maybe have relationships with people who have similar values and similar viewpoints, and that can be really helpful for you. So there's some research to say that there can be a lot of advantages to religious faith. It talks here about brain activity during meditation, which could also be during something like prayer. And so what we see is that usually people have changes in their brain while praying or meditating where they're more paying attention but not paying attention on themselves. So maybe thinking about other people, maybe praying for other people, or thinking about what your particular faith is something that seems to be good for individuals, can help reduce stress. I would think that perhaps for people who are not spiritual, then there are other forms of meditation that might give some similar advantages as well. So what about being retired? Retirement is something that you guys might not be thinking about right now. You're trying to get started in your career, but for someone towards the end of their career, this is a very big decision and something that people might feel very positively about or maybe feel negatively about. There's not necessarily a set age based on when people will retire. Of course, some older individuals continue to work. It talks about the fact that retirement can either be sudden, so we've been working full time and then we reach a certain point, we put in our notice and we retire, and on Tuesday we're working full time and on Wednesday we're retired. Or it could be gradual, where a person cuts down their workload, cuts down their hours, or if they completely retire from their full-time job, then they might hold what you might call a bridge job or a part-time job or something they do on the side, which could be something creative or some service they're able to provide, which can allow them to continue to stay active as well as to continue to bring in some income. But that's something that I think is a little bit less stressful because it's something they have a little bit more control over the timing, and so that can be really helpful. It talks about men in particular following this pattern, but of course women could do this as well. So why do people retire? Many potential reasons. Of course, you would want to think that people are retiring because they want to retire, because they feel like they have the finances they need. Of course, with people living longer these days, and then also thinking about people entering the workforce later, so maybe they haven't had as many years where they've been putting money into retirement or savings or that kind of thing, then this can be an issue. Maybe people feel like they have to work longer. Sometimes people might feel like they have to retire because of health issues that can come along with getting older, chronic health conditions, that kind of thing. Or we talked a little bit about how people who are getting older now are less likely to have things like college education or a lot of information about technology and that kind of thing. So it might be a situation where some people feel like they're forced to retire, as in, we're going to be hiring new people, so if you don't retire, you're going to be let go, that kind of thing, which would be unfortunate for someone to feel like they were forced into retirement if they weren't ready for that. So we've already talked about how women might have different experiences in the workplace than men, difficulties, things like discrimination, talked about the glass ceiling, glass cliff. Well, we see that women tend to enter the workforce later and have more interruptions on average, and this probably has a lot to do with having children and raising children, but it might also have to do with taking care of other family members. Remember that daughters and daughters-in-law are more likely to be caring for elderly family members as well. All of this combines to result in women having less retirement income, and this could be especially prevalent if you think about a woman who's single, a woman who's divorced or widowed, then that could be a potential issue here. So women might put less time into planning for retirement, maybe focusing more on taking care of other people, and therefore might have to continue working part-time even if they don't want to because they need that extra income. So that might be a little bit more likely for women. Now, when we're talking about adjusting to retirement, part of this, I think, has to do with whether you felt like you were able to retire when you wanted to, or if you felt like retirement was forced on you. If you feel like you have some personal control over how your retirement happened, that can be really helpful. Also, one other thing to note here, having that financial security is huge. Feeling like you can continue to take care of yourself and your family members should need arise, but then also making sure that you have social support. Good physical health is always great. It talks here about adjusting to retirement better when men endorse non-traditional gender roles, which is something that I think is on the rise in our culture. So more and more now we have dual earner incomes. We have both partners working outside of the home. And if both partners are working outside of the home, then men might have to step up and take on some of these these roles that have traditionally been seen as being female work. Things like cooking and cleaning and childcare and that kind of thing. So thinking beyond the working years, when you retire, if both partners are now home. So when both partners were working, we both needed to contribute. Now both partners are home, so we both need to contribute. That can make an individual happier and make a spouse happier as well. So once again, happier if we were able to choose when we retired, if that was a voluntary thing, and not just whether or not the company forced you to retire, but then also it would be better for them to make this decision on their own without feeling like they have a partner that forced them into it. Although it's still a good idea to make sure to get your partner's input, of course. We live in an individualistic society. We like to make our own decisions. All right, now, after an individual retires, what are they going to do? For a while, it might seem like you just want to go lay on a beach somewhere, go play golf, or sleep late, and that sounds entertaining for a little while, and then after a while, you're bored. So, there are certain organizations there to make sure that people who are retired continue to be active. It talks about the AARP here. I'm sure you can find local things that would be great for you to do. So we've already talked about how retired individuals sometimes pick up a part-time job, that kind of thing. But also volunteering is something great for older individuals to get involved in. Maybe when they were younger they didn't have time to do this. But volunteering when you're older I think is also a great idea because you have some wisdom, you have some experience that you can bring to a situation. This helps an individual to stay active, to feel like you are needed by other people. And sometimes at that retirement age, you know, your kids and grandkids may not always be right there available, but you can find other people that you can pour into as well. And so there are lots of different varieties of volunteer experiences that you can be a part of. So hopefully you can find something that is a good match for you. So if we're talking about social issues later in life, one of the most important things would be the relationships that you have with friends and family. So people who are retired might be working part-time, might be volunteering, or might decide to spend that time pouring into the people in their lives. I like this idea here. The slides mention a social convoy. You think about a group of people who go with you through life. Now, there may be some people that have come into your life for a time and then left. But you probably have some people who have gone through a large chunk of your life with you, providing support, providing entertainment, providing common interests, that kind of thing. So it talks about this providing this protective, secure cushion. The idea that when you're a child, you are attached to your parents, probably your caregivers, and you would hope that you have that secure attachment. But then as you get older, you become attached to others. This could be spouse, other family members, maybe cousins, siblings, but this could also be friends, people that you met through religious experiences, hobbies, etc. So you have people here that can help take care of you when you go through difficult times, and you can take care of them. So this is good for your mental health, obviously. So we're thinking about a reduction in stress, which can help reduce things like anxiety and depression and substance use. Now, this is good for everyone. I would encourage this for you regardless. But one thing that we do see is that certain populations, it talks about different ethnic issues down here. Certain populations might feel like they need this a little bit more than others. So I've talked about the fact that we live in an individualistic culture, but within our individualistic culture, there are different levels of this individualism. And we often see that minority groups report having a higher collectivist viewpoint, so focusing more on other people, which I think could be really helpful. I think individualism can create a lot of problems if we took a hard look at the actual results of that. But I think it's really helpful for you to have other people who are focusing on you and you focusing on other people instead of all of us focusing on ourselves and being very lonely potentially there. So some individuals report this being more important than others. I would encourage us all to make sure that we're loving on the people in our lives, right? So these friendships that you have later in life, there's a pattern here that's going to continue. It talks about online friendships. Certainly older individuals are capable of meeting people just like anyone else can meet people online. I would encourage you to be cautious, just kind of keeping an eye out for elderly family members and online things. We're going to talk later about how sometimes people take advantage of other people, and especially older people with online situations will come back up. But could be a good thing here. One thing that you'll see is that as you get older, you tend to have fewer friendships, and this may be because people are dying or having health-related issues or just kind of drifting away, or people are moving to stay with family members, that kind of thing. But this might be a decreasing trend, so maybe people are maintaining those relationships a little bit better now that we have things like technology. Even if someone moves away, you can still stay in touch, that kind of thing. So looking for friends that provide something meaningful, add something meaningful to your life, whether that be some wisdom and knowledge they give, whether that impacts the way that you view yourself, thinking about your social role in your friend group, helping you through difficult emotions and helping you respond to those appropriately. Friendship is something that's important throughout the lifespan. We start talking about friendship when we're dealing with toddlers, and we kind of persist throughout life, this being an important theme. Now, if we're going to be talking about friendships, we should be thinking about our best friend, and hopefully that would be a spouse. So, as people get older, they tend to have, as we've already talked about, more positive well-being and less symptoms of depression. So, people kind of mellow on average as they get older. And so, they might perceive negative events as being a little bit less dramatic, a little bit less severe than younger people would. Now, we have talked about having kids, and there are certainly, if you're taking a cold, hard look at this, there are advantages and disadvantages to having kids. But one thing that you will see towards the end of life is that satisfaction increases in older couples who have children. So, a couple different ways to think about this. We saw that there might be a little bit more of a decline in satisfaction earlier in marriage for people who have kids. So this could just be that rebounding. That it could just be that. Or it could be that as you get older, watching your kids, have grandkids, there's certain experiences that can come along with parenting. Usually as kids get older, they can have better relationships with their parents, potentially. So certainly there are things about having kids that can be beneficial later in life. Also, having someone there to help you is not a bad thing either. So, marriage is very important, even in our individualistic culture with a 50% divorce rate. I hope that we continue to recognize how important marriage is. People who are married, especially people who are happily married, tend to have better outcomes in a wide variety of things. When it talks here about chronic illness, people who've been diagnosed with terminal illness, they live longer after that diagnosis if they're in a high-quality marriage. So marriage is something that can be very protective. But of course there are certain stresses that go along with it, and caring for a spouse who is chronically ill can be incredibly stressful because you're going to be living with this person. This is someone that you care about deeply, and so watching them struggle and being the one who is primarily responsible for their health care can be really stressful here. So it is important for someone, even if they are the primary caretaker, to make sure that they have help, to make sure that they are not taking on all that stress by themselves. As you can imagine, as a partner's health goes down, there's also going to be a decrease in marital satisfaction and overall life satisfaction as well, kind of slowly declining as a partner becomes sicker and sicker. However, if the marriage was very happy before the individual got sick, that can be a protective factor here. So remembering all the years that you had together that were fantastic can make it a little bit easier to cope with the difficult years that can be brought on by age or specifically by illness here. Now, if we're thinking about taking care of a partner that is sick, then we need to have the unpleasant discussion of what it would be like to lose a partner. And this is something that I can imagine would be one of the hardest things to face, a very traumatic experience. And of course, there are different ways that this could happen. This could be something that happened over a period of time as a person's health declined, or it could be something kind of out of the blue, unexpected. Either way, I'm sure very difficult to deal with. So losing a partner increases your risk of dying substantially. Probably you've seen this happen in older couples when one of them passes away and then before long the other one passes away as well. Probably because of the impact on health when you have that kind of stressful experience of losing a partner. Even if an individual survives beyond losing a partner, you can experience extreme loneliness. There's a major change in the way that life looks and the way that that works. Maybe living alone for the first time in a really long time. Maybe losing friendships or family support. So people show up to help you right after the event, perhaps, and then after that, the social support can kind of dwindle, and that can be a really difficult time. When it talks about widowers, we're talking about a man that's lost a wife. When we talk about widows, we're talking about a wife that's lost a husband. So when it talks about widowers recovering more slowly, I think women are a little bit more likely perhaps to reach out and ask for help and to get social support. And so for that reason, they might have better overall well-being. But then financial concerns can happen, especially if a husband was providing the majority of the finances, then that's definitely something to consider. Now, we talked about people having a little bit of an increase in satisfaction later in life when they've had kids, and that can be because they're experiencing relationships with grandkids or even great-grandkids. So it talks about women especially being likely to be great-grandparents. Remember that women tend to live longer on average than men do, so that's probably part of the reason for this. So what's happening with great-grandparenthood? Well, you can imagine that this might be an unexpected situation. Maybe you never thought you were going to live long enough to see great-grandchildren. And so this is a major milestone. Like, I've lived long enough to see great-grandchildren. This is an exciting time, this new role to take on. And of course, babies are adorable and precious, and especially when you're watching someone that you care about having children, that can be a really precious time. And also, I think that you can have different relationships with people in your life when they start to have kids. If you have kids and then people around you start having kids, you have all these new conversations you can have and all these new bonding experiences you can have. So this is definitely something to look forward to. But there are definitely difficult things as well that can happen as a person gets older. It talks here about frailty. So you know that as an individual gets older, that some individuals need different amounts of care. And so a frailer individual is one who has some kind of disability, which could be a physical disability, or it could also be psychological issues. So this could be something like Alzheimer's disease. This is someone who needs help with daily living. So a couple of different aspects of daily living. It talks about activities of daily living, which is just basic stuff. So getting out of bed, getting dressed, self-care. But instrumental activities of daily living require intellectual competence. So, for example, this might be something like driving or making a meal plan, cooking, those kinds of things that might then involve a little bit more cognitive components to it, and might also involve some danger. If an individual is frail and having cognitive issues and physical disabilities, then this could be dangerous for them or other people as well. So people might need help with these activities. Now, when it talks about frail older adults, this is going to vary. Some individuals keep their health longer, and that's why we can't really have a standard age about when a person should stop driving or when a person should stop living alone, because there is such a wide range of different health conditions at different ages. It talks about how individuals who are experiencing more frailty are more likely to have anxiety and depression. So depression tends to decline as you get older, as long as an individual maintains good health. But if you start to have health problems and cognitive declines, especially if you are no longer able to live independently, so if you're in something like a facility here, then that's where we do tend to see a little bit more anxiety and depression. So as a person gets older, they're more likely to need help. Also, women might be a little bit more likely to need help. There are different thoughts on why this might be. I mean, women living longer could potentially be part of this. Women might be more likely to reach out for that help, ask for their help. It also talks about ethnic differences down here. But once again, when you're thinking about ethnicity, remembering the different viewpoints on individualism versus collectivist viewpoints. So someone who has a collectivist viewpoint and is around others who have that same viewpoint might have more support, might have more family support, people they can reach out to, might be more willing to ask for help, that kind of thing. So making up your mind about living situations can be really complicated, as something that I have personally witnessed with grandparents, that kind of thing, making these decisions. So individuals, it talks about a sense of place. You often feel some attachment to where you live. And an individual that is older towards the end of life is probably aware that if they ever move out of their current living situation, they're not likely to come back to that living situation. So they might be very resistant to that idea. So then at a certain point, you might feel like this is a decision that has to be made if a person cannot live alone safely. Perhaps there's some modifications you can make, having people come by and help, or setting up a downstairs bedroom so that we don't have to deal with stairs, that kind of thing. Maybe there's something we can do. But if we can't do that, then there's the difficult decision about moving in with family or friends, or living in some kind of assisted living or nursing home situation. I asked you guys during one of your activities to think about what would that be like for someone to care for their elderly parent. So probably you find yourself in a situation where you're caring for an elderly parent about the same time you're also caring for your children who are still living at home as well. So that can have stress involved. And also you might be thinking about how many children someone has. If someone has multiple children, then which one are we going to move in with, and how does that impact relationships with other children as well? So assisted living facilities can be fantastic. Of course, you want to look into each individual situation, and also you have to think about financial situations, how much this kind of thing costs. It talks about people who have some kind of limitations here. So whether that be just the daily self-care, or whether it be with the things that are a little bit more cognitively advanced to the person who needs help. But assisted living facilities do not provide 24/7 care. So this is someone where they might bring by food, and they might be there if you have needs. You can call them, they can come and help you. But this is not where you have someone watching you 24 hours a day. So when you look at people who are living in these facilities, it talks about them being 65 or older, and maybe even much older. We might then start to ask yourself the question, why would someone younger than 65 be in an assisted living facility? Well, there might be some kind of degenerative health condition, which could be something physical, but could also be psychological. You might have early onset Alzheimer's disease, that kind of thing. That could potentially be an issue. It talks about memory impairment here. Now, when we're thinking about different types of facilities, nursing homes also being an option, once again, you want to make sure that you are looking into each individual place to see what kind of care they provide. So, in a nursing home, you would have nurses there 24 hours a day to make sure that needs are met. It talks about 5% of U.S. older adults living in nursing homes, which is not a very large percentage. But then as you get older, over 85, 15%. So there's still certainly a lot of people who are finding ways to live independently, or living with family members, that kind of thing. You do want to make sure that if you have a family member that's in a nursing home situation, you want to make sure that it is a high quality facility, because certainly elder abuse and neglect can be an issue. A really hard issue to talk about, certainly not one that we would want to think about, but something that we should just bear in mind. There are different types of abuse that can happen when an individual is older, and certainly someone who's older and has health conditions, if you live in this facility where these are the individuals that are providing all of your care, then you are especially vulnerable. It may be very difficult to report, or to have these reports taken seriously. So you see the different types of abuse that are listed here. Some of these you might think about with different age ranges, physical, sexual, emotional, psychological, but you can also see people trying to take advantage of older individuals when it comes to finances. And of course this can happen a wide variety of people. I mentioned this with nursing homes, and it can happen in nursing homes. But certainly individuals who are living in the community, living with family members, can also fall prey to this as well. Abandonment and neglect. It talks about self-neglect here as well. Older individuals might stop expressing their needs and trying to get their needs met as well, almost as if they are neglecting themselves. Now, different cultures view older individuals different ways, and some cultures have more of an emphasis on the respect of older individuals than others. And so because of that, from culture to culture, the way that older individuals are treated, and the expectations we have for how they're treated are going to vary from culture to culture. When we're talking about the prevalence of abuse and neglect in older individuals, neglect is the most common type. So certainly this would involve, and you think about neglect, it sounds as if it's less severe than abuse, but not necessarily. You're not meeting a person's needs. So this could be providing adequate nutrition or helping someone with hygiene issues, that kind of thing. So neglect being still very serious. But then also physical abuse and financial exploitation, material exploitation. So stealing things, taking things, manipulating people into giving you things, that kind of situation. So we have estimates here about how often this happens, but we really think that we miss a lot of cases here. It may be difficult for individuals to report this. They may not have access to a way to communicate that information if the person who is providing their care is also the one who is neglecting or abusing them. They might not have an opportunity to report that, or there might be some fear associated. If I do report that, what's going to happen to my living situation, that kind of thing. So when we talk about limits of confidentiality, as in what do I have to report, if I'm a psychologist and a client comes to me, we tell them about limits of confidentiality. Like if you're thinking about hurting yourself or hurting someone else, I have to report that. But also, if you tell me about abuse of a child or abuse of a vulnerable adult, then I have to report that as well. And there's a reason for that. There might be some kind of gray area about when you might report something, if it is something that is less severe and something that's happening with an adult that has some access to help and can take care of themselves. But if it's a child or a vulnerable adult, then they definitely have to have someone to advocate for them because of issues like this. Now, when it talks about risk factors here, once again, if we think there are a lot of cases that we're missing, then it's hard to do research on this issue. But one thing, 2/3 of the time it's family members, which is startling. You wouldn't like to think of people taking advantage of their own family members, but it can happen. And also, I do want to note that sometimes people have good intentions here. Sometimes people think that, or they don't realize that what they're doing is neglectful or abusive, which is why it's a good idea to have multiple people involved so that we have some checks and balances here. I have heard of situations and seen situations where people were being borderline psychologically abusive towards people who had memory issues, trying to, like, you remember this, you're supposed to remember this, and confusing them and upsetting them. And people might think that that's a good thing to do because that's going to help them remember. Just refer back to what I said in the early lectures. Like, just love the person where they are right now. Don't expect them to be the person that they used to be, right? So also, in addition to family members, it can be other caregivers. It talks about bankers here, religious leaders potentially, telemarketers and investment schemes. Make sure that you keep an eye. Sometimes this is a signal that a person might be starting to have some issues if they've been taken advantage of. It just turns your stomach to think about people who would take advantage of older individuals, people who have cognitive deficits and declines here, but that can happen, and so making sure that you're keeping a close eye on the people that you love could be really helpful. Lots of different risk factors here, potential causes. It talks here about poverty. If you live in poverty, then you might not be able to afford that high quality care. You might not be in a situation where you're able to go into a facility where people can take good care of you. So you might have to live in a facility that's not that great, or with family members that might potentially take advantage of you. It talks about social isolation here. So if you don't have people checking on you, if you don't have friends or loving, caring family members that can be involved, that's definitely a risk factor. When it talks about victimize or dependency or retribution, one thing you might think about is if at some point this person was abusive towards a spouse or a child, and now that individual is older and now they are in need of care, and the person who previously was abused by them now feels like they have an opportunity to get retribution on an older individual. Certainly a lot of really difficult, really complicated situations that can come up here. So something to just keep an eye on. So let me know if you guys need anything, and I will talk to you during our last lecture video next week. Have a great day.